all of a sudden, hey, hello.
Hey, calling
Well,
Chris Anderson. It's not a Novotel. It's a new
I know it's
place.
right. Yeah, it's not an overtell. You got tonight's studio is in Marseille, France.
Marseille. What
Yeah,
brings you to Marseille?
I am doing research for the 80th anniversary of Operation Dragoon next year. So we're doing a site inspection to get ready for the tour for next August.
So that's the invasion of southern
Southern France.
France. So here's I like this. This is I guess a memorial to General Patch who
Yeah.
commanded that, and you can see all like the super luxury yachts there in the
Yeah,
background.
yeah. There's definitely battlefield travel is a lot classier in this part of the world. I
And
gotta
then
say.
I got a kick out of this. What is this tank vehicle?
So that's on the where the 45th Infantry Division landed,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's an amphibious tank that didn't make the run in, of course. But what you don't see in the picture is everybody behind me is very tanned and beautiful and French and scantily clad. So I had to turn around and get just the picture of the history bit.
There you go. Well, welcome everybody to History Happy Hour, brought to you with the help of Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours, offering a variety of history tours in Europe, the U.S., and the Pacific. You can check it out at stephenambrosetours.com and look for the Operation Dragoon Anvil tour that will be eventually available there. And whether you're
Absolutely.
watching live, watching on replay, or listening on the HHH podcast. Thank you for joining us. And today we're going to be talking about the excavation of Revolutionary War remains from two different battlefields. So really been looking forward to this show. Let us know you're here. Let us know where you're watching from, what you're drinking, anything else you want to communicate to
All right.
us. And Chris, we want to thank everybody who supports us on Patreon, especially our top shelf patrons. It's a growing list. Look, we have three more names
Hey.
we can get on there,
Yeah.
and then we'd have to make the type smaller. But we can do that.
We're happy to do that.
No, we're seriously grateful to both our top shelf patrons and everybody who supports us on Patreon. And you can join that group if you want by going to patreon.com/historyhappyhour. And Chris, do we have anybody out there watching us at this
We
point?
we do, in fact. We have Bill from Louisiana and Laurel Besenson, Lizzie Borden. I was happy to see Lizzie. Donna Laprelle from Madison, Alabama. Jim Payne from Arizona. So yeah.
I see Jim Stark and Wally Morrison and Don Dale from Statesville, North Carolina. So we've got quite an interesting group. And I think we have probably gotten enough done here that we can get the show started. What do you think?
I think. Oh, you're ready. Okay.
Okay, so give me a cue and I'll be ready to go.
The bar is open.
The bar is open, and we're going to head back in time to the American Revolution and some stuff associated with that. The Battle of Redbank in New Jersey was a one-sided American victory over a Hessian force attacking Fort Mercer on the Delaware River in November 1777. And the Battle of Camden in South Carolina was a disastrous American defeat, which was inflicted by Lord Cornwallis upon American General Horatio Gates in 1781. And archaeological digs at these two battlefields in the last 2 years have unearthed the remains of, I think, an astonishing number, 27, at least 27 Revolutionary War soldiers. American, Scottish, Hessian, men, teenage boys, all who have lain there for 250 years. And Chris and I have been wanting to talk about these digs since last summer, and we have finally put it together to do it today. And we have three guests joining us. We want to welcome Stephen Smith from the University of South Carolina Institute for Archaeology and Anthropology, who's the principal investigator of the Camden Battlefield Project. We also have the co-directors of the Redbank dig, historian Jennifer Janofsky, who's a fellow at Rowan University and the director of the Redbank Battlefield Park, and archaeologist Wade Katz, who's president and principal at South River Heritage Consulting. Guys, welcome to History Happy Hour.
Yes. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is not our largest group of guests, but it's definitely up there. It's definitely more than the one that we're usually going with. So, and I do want to offer a little disclaimer at the top of the show. We are going to show some images which contain parts of the skeletons uncovered. Nothing shocking or gruesome, but if that's something that might be triggering to you, we just want to make you aware of that now. And I want to start out by asking you guys just a general sort of starting question, which is how these digs came about. I mean, these are two battlefields that have been around for a long time and been open to the public for a while. How did these digs come about, and how did you know that you were going to be unearthing bodies, or was that something unexpected? And I'll start just because your battle came first. Jen and Wade, I'll leave it to you guys to start answering that question, and then after you answer, Stephen, you can jump in and tell us about Camden.
I'm happy to start. So Redbank Battlefield Park is a 44-acre park in southern New Jersey. We're located directly across from Philadelphia International Airport. We've been in existence as a county park since the early 20th century. About 2 years ago, in 2020, we received an offer to purchase a 1/4 acre parcel of land adjacent to the northern boundary of the park. And so when we went to take a look at the parcel with our Office of Land Preservation, the thing that struck us about the site was it appeared that there was a Fort Mercer trench that ran right directly through the property. And we know that in the 1930s, the Works Progress Administration had done some work in the trenches that we have in the park. But to our knowledge, this 1/4 acre seemed pristine. The trench seemed undisturbed. And so we applied for a grant. We purchased the lot. We applied for a grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission to do an archaeological survey of the parcel, as well as design a public archaeology program. And so we retained Wade Katz. Wade and I had met during a 2015 project through the American Battlefield Protection Program. And together we designed 4 public days of participation. And so the public was able to sign up, work side by side with the archaeology team, work screens, look for artifacts, learn about the archaeological process. We worked with a number of different volunteer organizations like the Archaeology Society of New Jersey and their volunteers who lent a tremendous effort to the project. And so the project was merely intended to study the trench and to provide the public with an opportunity to learn more about why we do archaeology on the battlefield. And on June 26th, the last day of the project, one of our volunteers who had a fair amount of archaeological experience discreetly came to Wade and I and said, I think I have a human bone. And I'll let Wade take the story from there.
Yeah, so we had done ground penetrating radar of this section of the fort ditch previously. And so the ditch is where the soil that you build the wall of the fort out of comes from. The wall, this fortification, Fort Mercer, was an earthen fort. So the soil from the ditch gets used to build the wall. So by looking in the bottom of the ditch and by looking in the stratigraphy in the ditch, we were hoping to identify some portion of that fort that was related to the stuff that was at the bottom of the ditch. In theory, should be from about the time of the battle. The GPR identified an anomaly signature of some sort that was there, but you can't tell exactly what that is and what it was going to turn out to be. So when the volunteer identified the bone, I'm not a human osteologist. That's not my expertise. So we called in the archaeologist who works for the New Jersey State Police Forensics Lab. They have such a person. She's an anthropologist trained in archaeology. She confirmed that they were human remains. And then we had to kind of work from that space to, you can't identify somebody based on their femur. And then we were already in the process of opening up additional units to dig that space. Everybody that we identified was in the bottom about 6 or 8 inches of soil in the base of that trench. And that turned out to be ultimately what we have are 15 sets of human remains. So wow. I think that kind of gives you the background of that. And then Steve, your story may be a little different than ours.
Yeah. Initially, this battlefield has not been protected in the past. And in the late 90s, my colleague Jim Legg he was asked to carve out what he thought the battlefield was. It was about 1998. And he identified a small area around a DAR park, which was the only area where there was any monuments to the battle at all. And from there, we looked at about 300 acres. We got 2 different grants from the National Park Service to do work there. We've been working there since then, since about 2000 up to the present. And one of the first projects we did was to interview collectors who had been there for years, because they had huge collections of artifacts from the battlefield. And in the course of interviewing them and taking them out to the battlefield and asking them where they found things, they identified some human remains that they had uncovered. In some cases they didn't. In some cases they said something like, well, we found 2 buckles here, two shoe buckles here. And that kind of gave us a hint there might be something else there. And then in the course of our work, we identified locations, and that turned out to be 6 individuals. And in about 2019, the South Carolina Battleground Trust, we had expressed the importance of the fact that these burials were very, very shallow, just below the surface. Every one of them except the British soldier. And the British soldier had been found by a relic collector who had obtained a large brass sword belt identifier. And so he was about 1.5 feet on the ground. The rest were just below the surface. In fact, during the excavations, we realized that one of those had actually his femur sticking above ground. You couldn't tell that in the woods at the time, but through our excavation. So the South Carolina Battleground Trust decided, and we thought that was a good idea, to get these gentlemen excavated because they were in danger. There was ongoing forest activities, cutting of trees, and every time they went in and do some logging, you're going to disturb these remains. And the trees were about ready to be logged out, so it was time, and the South Carolina Battleground Trust funded the work to recover 6 individuals. In the course of that work, a couple of those individuals one became 5 and one became 2. And in the course of our expansion around our units, we came into a 3 group. And during the course of the work, we did additional systematic metal detecting, and it came across yet another. So we ended up with 14 individuals, 12 Continental soldiers, 1 identified soldier, and he only had civilian buttons on him, and then 1 British Highlander sent from the 71st Highland.
So guys, this isn't going to be a history discussion, and we wouldn't have enough time, even if we wanted to get into the details of the battles. But maybe you could just kind of briefly tell us a little bit about the particular actions where you're doing these digs, and if there's something as stands out about the fighting or whatnot, just so our viewers have some kind of point of reference as to what we're going to be talking about.
I'd be happy to talk about Redbank. I feel like been the park director there for almost 10 years, and I think it's one of the most remarkable battles in Revolutionary War history, and yet it continues to surprise me that people just don't know much about the significance of the battle. It's part of the larger Philadelphia campaign. In September of 1777, Philadelphia falls to the British, and the British are in desperate need to get supplies into the city of Philadelphia, but the Americans commanded the Delaware River. They did that through a series of underwater structures known as chevaux de frise, which were basically like large sharpened spears that would like pierce the hull of a boat as it's trying to progress into the city. There's also a series of river fortifications. So Fort Mercer, where we are on the New Jersey side, across is Fort Mifflin in Philadelphia, and to the south is Fort Billingsport. So the 3 forts were working together to keep supplies out of Philadelphia. In October, the British are starting to get desperate. They need to open the river. So they send Hessian troops to attack Fort Mercer. Defending the garrison is the Rhode Island Regiment. What makes this a particularly interesting moment in Revolutionary War history is at that time, it is an integrated fighting force. So we know through recent research that 56 of those individuals are of African American and Native American descent. And so you have Black soldiers, Native American soldiers, and white soldiers defending Fort Mercer under the leadership of Colonel Christopher Green. If you were a betting person on that day, you would not have picked the Rhode Island Regiment to win the day. They were dramatically outnumbered, roughly a fighting force of around 500 to 600 within Fort Mercer, fighting an attacking force of 1,500 Hessians with more in reserve. And the Hessians lost a dramatic number of individuals. And so between 300 and 400 dead or injured, a chaotic battle. It's over in 45 minutes, and it's the greatest loss of Hessian life in the Revolutionary War. So even though the Philadelphia campaign ends up being a loss, it is a battle that gets international attention. You know, John Adams says, hey, Europe is going to start taking us more seriously because these guys can seriously fight. And so it's a remarkable moment to me, particularly because of the contributions of the Black troops and Native American troops who participated in this battle, which is the subject of my ongoing research, is to reinsert them back into the historical narrative, because for over 100 years, this was not something that was discussed or any part of the interpretive programming that we offered at Redbank. And so this has been something that has been important to me, that people understand the diverse participants in the battle. And now with the discovery of Hessian remains, it gives us even more opportunity to talk about the diversity of participants in that space.
Stephen, do you want to, I know you're not a historian, and so we don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to give us a little summary, or if you don't, we can.
No, I'll do a summary, but okay. I like to think of myself as a historian archaeologist.
An historical archaeologist.
Yeah, I do quite a bit of history.
Historiarchaeologist, maybe.
Yeah, so you can't do historical archaeology without,
right.
In the early days, they did historical archaeology without
doing
a lot of history, but today we do a lot of history involved in the archaeology. But that's beside the point. This battle was in August of 1780. And in late 1779, the British turned their strategic effort against the colonies towards the south, and the British captured Charleston in May of 1780, and immediately fanned out into the backcountry and captured all the little countries, villages, in order to subdue the backcountry, and that included Augusta and 96 and Camden. And Georgetown, and kind of an arc, and Camden was sort of the keystone in that arc of occupied British villages. And after that loss of 5,000 men captured in Charleston, the Americans sent down reinforcements. In fact, some of them were on their way before the fall of Charleston in May of 1780, but they held out in North Carolina and waited for Congress to come up with a new commander for the Second Continental Army to come south. And that turned out to be Horatio Gates. He inherited what he had, and there was large numbers of Virginia and North Carolina militia that eventually would join him at a sort of a small plantation mill site called Rugeley's Mill, about 13 miles north of Camden. Cornwallis, who was in Charleston at the time, immediately rode north to join Lord Walden in Camden. Ironically, Gates decided he wanted to get closer to Camden to put more pressure on the British. And the British knew that he was where he was. And at 10 o'clock on the evening of August 15th, 10 o'clock in the evening, both sides started marching towards each other. They met at the battlefield in the middle of the night at about 2 a.m. There was a brief skirmish. The British immediately fell back, and Cornwallis told everybody to pretty much take a nap. We know we don't have to march an additional 3 miles. There they are. The Americans spent the evening trying to get their forces lined up. And you can see from this picture here, the dark blue is is the Americans, Continentals, and the light blue are the American militia. On the far end is the Virginia militia. And in the morning, very early in the morning, the Americans saw the British beginning to deploy, fired canister at them as they were deploying. But as as you have a setup here, both sides used the classical setup by putting their strongest men on the right side. So you're looking at the Americans on the right side there of the picture. Those are the First Continental, Maryland, and Delawares, up against the Royalists and Loyalists and the Volunteers of Ireland. And then on the left side, you've got the Virginia militia and the North Carolina militia against the 33rd and 23rd regiments of foot. Behind there is the 71st Highlanders and Tarleton's Dragoons. And what happened was, as soon as the British marched forward to engage the Americans, the Virginia militia began running, and then the North Carolina began running. And there was a tremendous battle on the right side of the battlefield. The Americans' 2nd Brigade in reserve there tried to move forward to engage the regular British forces. It ended up being 2 battles, and then Cornwallis saw the gap between the 2 battles that were occurring and sent in his dragoons and Tarleton's guys, and from that point on, it was a massive retreat. Several thousand Americans killed or captured. No one knows how many. Cornwallis claimed 900, probably not that many killed, but a lot captured. And many of the Continentals fought their way off the battlefield and actually showed up in Hillsborough, North Carolina, a couple of months later. Some of the Virginia militia may still be running.
And Horatio Gates went on a very famous
and Gates
ride.
Who rode all the way to Charlotte, and then decided that there wasn't anything he could do there, so he rode all the way to Hillsborough.
Kept going.
Didn't do his reputation very much.
Yeah, that the hero of Saratoga kind of was the goat of Camden.
And
So, we've talked about the battles a little bit. We understand how the dig started. So, I guess one of the things that I think people would want to know about is what you can learn, what you have learned from the bodies or the remains, because I know in some cases it's not whole bodies, the remains that you've uncovered. What have you already kind of drawn from that? And then what might you be able to learn in the future through forensic analysis or DNA or whatever lab stuff, that you might be able to do that would kind of give you even more in-depth information? And again, we'll start, Wade and Jen, with you guys.
You want to start, Jen? Go ahead.
Well, no, why don't you start, Wade, and then I can come in at the end and talk about the interpretation stuff. So maybe.
Okay.
So this is just proof that this is a spontaneous show. We didn't plan this all out.
That's right.
We try not to speak over one another. So.
So the archaeological work that we did, as we uncovered the remains, as I mentioned, they were near the bottom 6 to 8 inches of the fort ditch, and that included the number of artifacts that we actually got was very low in comparison to the space that we were in. The bottom of that ditch was only about 13 feet across. We identified the inside scarp wall of the fort very clearly. The exterior edge of the ditch, the counter scarp, is also fairly well defined, and all sets of remains were inside that space. Within that area, in pretty much association with the human remains, are about 20 musket balls, of which all except one are impacted balls, and all of them were, except that one, they were all the same caliber that would be consistent with a Charleville musket, which is what the Rhode Island defenders would have been carrying.
What does an impacted musket ball mean?
So an unimpacted musket ball, it would be round. Right, it would be exactly it's a lead ball. It would be a round lead ball. They vary in size, but you could kind of use your fingers, perhaps, Steve. I think that's a good way to do it. To say your little finger would be one that's a caliber versus a larger one that might be your thumb size or your index finger. If it's not hit a target, it'll still be round. It'll just be a dropped ball. Somebody lost it in a cartridge, because they will be in a cartridge. If it impacted something, if it hit a target, lead flattens out when it hits something. And so these all were impacted in some way. They had all hit a target of some kind. A couple of them were in close association with the bones. Not that you would say that if that musket ball broke the bone, but it probably hit soft tissue and lodged in whatever portion of the bone or the body that we had. We also had evidence that, and based as much on historical writing as the archaeology, because the archaeology bore this out. One of the other units that was involved in this battle is the Pennsylvania Navy, and they are firing. They are small row galley vessels that have a single cannon, but the cannons range in the size from about an 18-pound gun to a 32-pound gun, meaning that's the size of the ball that it can fire, the weight of the ball that it can fire. They also have howitzers on each of those, so they have an ability to fire a trajectory, you don't have to have direct line of sight to fire a howitzer. And they are firing. One of the Hessian survivors says that those vessels were firing chain shot and bar shot into the Hessian assault force. So chain shot would be two cannonballs linked by a chain that when it's fired, it comes out and spins. In a naval engagement, that's great for removing ships' masts and rigging. In a anti-personnel capacity, that can remove arms, legs, and heads. And so in the bottom of that fort ditch, we actually have more crania, more head fragments than anything else. We have dismembered legs, we have heads. And I think so the visual effect of what we have, like kind of the physical effect when you excavate that space, is that these are not complete individuals. This is very clearly the aftermath of a very grisly battle. And that these individuals were killed probably by the artillery fire, but the fact that we have as many musket balls in the bottom of that trench also suggests that these men were taking fire from the garrison as well as from the Pennsylvania Navy. We will be able to do, so 2 of our 15 crania are full skulls, and we can actually do digital facial reconstruction on these. And so we'll have the opportunity to really see who these individuals were. Historically, there is a record set called the Hetrina. It's initials Hetrina, which is for Hessians. It's in German. It translates to Hessian forces serving in North America during the Revolution, something along those lines, which is a document that was created it's a database. It was created in the 1970s in Marburg Archive by the archivists who work in Germany, in Marburg, Germany, to look at everybody who was a Hessian soldier who served in North America. And it includes their rank, their ages, the date of enlistment, what rank did they achieve, where were they born, if they were casualties, where were they casualties. And so we actually have a list of the names of the individuals who should, in theory, be in the base of this fort ditch. We can use that data to help us track down who some of these individuals are. Then we can also try to do some DNA work, some stable isotope analysis, some of which I think, Steve, you may be doing the same thing.
Right.
Try to then extract DNA from ancient bone, and that's not always an easy thing to do, but if it's possible, we actually may have the ability to kind of figure out who some of these individuals really were. And, within the team, we've discussed that if we get if we can identify 2 or 3 of these people out of 15, that's a pretty remarkable thing.
That'd be pretty cool.
These individuals went into this ditch the day after the battle. We know this from the documents. The Rhode Island regiments that were there buried these men buried the remains in the fort ditch. They were cleaning up the battlefield. We also have a powder horn that was carved by one of the defenders, which is pretty remarkable. A man, John Burlingame of the 2nd Rhode Island, he carves on his powder horn exactly the imagery that we saw in the bottom of that ditch. And it's very primitively drawn. It's that very kind of primitive etching on a powder horn. If you were to see it and not make that connection, you would just think it's an image, right? This guy just drew this. It's like you draw dragons and you draw things, and here he's drawing disembodied heads and dismembered arms and legs, and you go like, oh, he's making that up. He's not making that up. That's exactly what he saw on the battlefield the day after the battle. So it was a very grisly space to work in, and I don't know, Steve, what your effect of when you were working with the human remains, but the more days we spent in the bottom of that ditch, the more it was it really does affect you. And as you kind of work through this, you're trying to disassociate yourself from who these individuals are, but it's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, we had three of our individuals were fairly young, they're 13 to maybe 16. So, and they weren't, they probably weren't drummer boys or anything like that. They were probably in the ranks, and we do have some impacted balls against bone that definitely shows where they broke the bone. One of the young kids had a ball in his spine. The Highlander had a blunt force trauma to the back of his head. So you're seeing a lot of individual battlefield trauma in our remains also. We don't have any faces. All of the facial bone has gone. We do have some incomplete individuals who were probably, since they were so shallow, a lot of them might have had some of the, and this is the kind of also gruesome aspect of it is, I don't think all these guys were buried immediately after the battle. We've got indications where people were dragged off. They're missing maybe a femur or something. So pigs or coyotes, well, they wouldn't have been coyotes, but wolves would have been dragging some of these people away. So we also have that sort of real trauma. You were asking about what we could learn. Well, one of the first things we were learning, helping to confirm, is where things have happened on the battlefield. So it helps to know that, for instance, where the 71st guy was found is indication of how far north they got into the battlefield and where they were on the battlefield in terms of the history. And we can compare that. We had these 5 individuals who are Continental soldiers who may give us an indication of how far forward the 1st Maryland Brigade was able to get before they were completely thrown back by the British regulars. And then we have this individual who has no buttons, but that we found, but the private collectors found it. So they said he had civilian buttons, and so there's some indication that this was in the part of the battlefield where the North Carolina Royalists were. So that would tell us that maybe he was a British Royalist. And we're doing both the MDNA, where they say MDNA, which is the genealogy stuff, also to try to trace ancestry. And we got people like Larry Babbitts, you probably know, who are helping us identify the Continental, the Marylanders, and the Delawares. And then we have another forensic anthropologist, Carlina De La Cova, with the University of South Carolina. She's working on the shotgun DNA, which will help us determine things like some of the long-term illnesses that might be there, some sort of childhood illnesses that they suffered. Regionality, apparently they can do these stromium kinds of analyses, which gives us an idea of what region they came from, where they were living. So we hope that we'll be able to do all of that. But that's kind of the stuff that's going to be taking at least a couple of years, maybe.
Take some time. Yep.
It's a long process.
Has the work that you guys have been doing, has it changed? I mean, has this led to other people saying, well, we need to have more involvement with archaeologists on battlefields? Because I'm not an archaeologist, so but I'm married to one, and there was a lot of arguments for a long time about, yeah, right. She's like, well, I don't do. I'm an anthropologist. I'm like, yeah, but it's history, and we would have this argument. But I think, I guess, in my own superficial reading, there seems to be more archaeological involvement on battlefield sites. Are we seeing more of that? Has the stuff that you guys have done, has that led to other battlefields saying, hey, maybe we should get some people out here and we should?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of battlefields that are being hit right now. There's the National Park Service initiated a program in the early 2000s, I think, called the American Battlefield Protection Program. And while they don't fund excavations, they fund a lot of planning documents. And some of that planning, in order to do proper planning, you might have to do a survey. You might have to identify where the site is. And of course, that led to an explosion of people, archaeologists doing systematic metal detecting across battlefields to help define where what they would call the core battlefield was and where the peripheral parts of the battlefield are and all that sort of thing. And doing the military terrain analysis along with that, to combine that to learn not only more about the battlefield, but where it is so they can be better preserved.
That's actually, Steve, that's how we got involved, through ABPP. Yeah. So it was mind blowing to me that as of 2015, there had been no systematic archaeological survey of the battlefield area. There had been some archaeological studies in proximity to the historic house from 1748, the James and Anne Whitehall house, but there had been nothing done on the battlefield besides relic hunting over the years. And so when we applied in 2015 to the ABPP program, I knew nothing about archaeology. I am a traditionally trained historian, and as my archaeology friends know, historians don't always work with the archaeological record. It's so strange to me now that, thinking about my graduate training. And that's where I met Wade. And, it was the power of seeing the archaeologists work in the park with our park visitors that got us down the road of, we need to create a public archaeology program at Redbank Battlefield. Wade always works with outstanding, friendly people who are happy to engage with our park visitors. And I should mention that we are largely a recreational park. We're not dissimilar from like a Valley Forge where people go for hiking and walking and recreation. They're not necessarily there for the history. They're immensely proud of the history, but they're really there to take in the Delaware River and Philadelphia Airport, things like that. And so when they stumble across Wade's team working in the units, it's this amazing connection that they're experiencing with history. They're so excited to either through our program pull an object out of a screen, and you have that instantaneous connection of touching something that hasn't seen the light of day in 250 years, and then taking the conversation like with me a little bit further, like, why are we doing archaeology here? Is it just about finding the things, or is there something else that we can do with this information? And for us, it's about preservation. It's about determining Fort Mercer's footprint in the park, which has been extremely challenging to identify. And so based on the popularity of the program that Wade and I created in 2022, we just went through another series of public archaeology where we had 4 public days. Our first project had 100 volunteers. This project had over 200 volunteers. And so people are really interested. And I'm hoping with the approach of the 250th, anniversary that more battlefields are starting to think about how not only can they do archaeology to help them better understand their battlefield, but also incorporate the public into that. And so you can really foster that, interest and promote what archaeology can help us understand about the historical record.
Let me follow up on both of those things. So Steve, you're talking about ABPP funding these studies of these battlefields. I have had the opportunity to work on a number of these, and the archaeological evidence, that physical evidence really is extremely helpful in trying to understand where the event took place. We have this romanticized view of the American Revolution that it's bloodless and, the battlefields are already known. Everybody knows what needs to be known. And we've already commemorated everything we wanted to do, at least by the bicentennial. What possibly could be left to do? The archaeological information, that physical data is really important to find. And if you have metal detectorists who are out recreationally collecting material, you kind of put that in perspective on a place like Brandywine Battlefield, which I've been involved with. You have several thousand soldiers firing over a period of a couple hours at each other. That's going to leave a huge archaeological signature.
Okay, that's a perfect place for the
Good.
segue by Rick Meyer. They're going to show the red dot.
Oh,
Oh,
all right.
okay.
Oh,
Red
yeah,
dot.
see?
Come on.
Red map now. There you
Here
go.
we go. Here we go. We're going to go for the
Good.
red dots here.
Those are
All
red
right,
dots.
Okay, so imagine this battlefield. This is probably on the neighborhood of maybe 5,000 people being on this battlefield. which
This is the
pretty
Camden
small.
battlefield. Yeah.
And I can tell you, every one of these red dots is the location of precise location of a artifact, primarily
Mhm.
lead shot fired during that battle. And I can tell you, this is a remnant
Yeah.
of what this battle was, the intensity of this battle, because we've interviewed people who have boxes of lead shot that they came and removed from the battlefield before we got there. So you're just looking at the remnant of what it is, but you can still see from that how we can interpret what happened in that battlefield. You can see off to the left and not a lot of materials. Everything in white is where we've done systematic work. Everything in green is where we had not. So they're kind of, it's not a perfect, because we have to go where we have the opportunity to go, where there's been some burning done, where they've done some controlled burning, or where they've done some logging or clearing for some other purposes. This has given us an opportunity, but still, even then, you can see where the intense battle occurred on the left, and that retreating battlefield of the first Maryland on the right, or the east side of the road there, and how they fell back. So anyway, that's just perfect segue into the idea.
Rick appreciates that. He gets to use
Yeah,
this
yeah,
as a
yeah.
visual.
Got a visual. That was good.
All
Yeah,
right.
we worked on that pretty hard.
We have some questions from our audience, and one of them we kind of touched on this, but I wanna kind of go into this and maybe ask you to go into this in a little bit more detail. Has any attempt been made to trace living ancestors of these soldiers who died in these battles? Is it even possible, given the public DNA databases available? So you guys, you lighted on this a little bit, because you said, Wade, maybe we can identify 2 out of the
Right.
or 3 out of the 15 people we have. But is this something that is realistic, that you can maybe find DNA and then find somebody today who's related to them and go back in their tree and actually put a name to those remains that you have?
I would think it is possible. Now, in our conversations with our DNA and analysts, and I think she's a little more conservative about this than I am, you're looking at 245, 250-year-old DNA in in some cases, not in good condition. So you're going to get DNA from roots of teeth, or kind of cortical bone, and that's usually going to come from things like femurs, or heavy big bone. We don't have much of that. What we do have is teeth, but many of our teeth are enamel only and very little structure that's left inside. So right now, what we have done is sent off for analysis 5 samples, right, Jen? I think that's what we did.
Yes.
And we're going to just see what that provides. And we've sent pretty much the best individuals that we think we have. If that's successful, we can do additional sampling as well. Now, linking it to a modern population, once we have the DNA sequence for our group, then we can possibly do that and make it available for other people to see what that is. We've had people, and Jen can probably address this, we've had people come forward and say, I had an ancestor who fought in the revolution, you're welcome to have my DNA, these kind of things. So.
Well, we've got that's exactly the same answer I would give. First thing, do we have DNA that we can use? And we've done the same thing. We've sent off some DNA collected from the inside, the pulp of the teeth.
Right.
And that's gone to experts to try to figure out whether we can get that DNA. And then the next thing is whether or not it's going to be good enough to do what we want to do with it. Then we have to eliminate and get a list of individuals that we know from various units that participated, get the names of the people who died, and that's being worked on. And then we have quite a few throughout the process. We've had people contact us, and also just like Wade, volunteering, saying, my ancestor was died here, and I want to know whether or not it's him. So we kind of have already a bank of individuals who want to participate. But it's still kind of a long shot.
It may be. Yeah.
We might, if we can get 2 or 3. Now, the one, I think, you sounds like your Hessians might be better chance than I do, than we have, since you've got that list already pretty well narrowed down.
Right.
But the best chance I think we have is going to be with the 71st Highlander. It's a smaller population. It's one individual. He was, and I might point this out, he was buried 1.5 feet deep. He was buried formally. He was laid out. His friends buried him, basically. Somebody on the British side knew him and took the time to put him in the ground deeply. The rest of the individuals are just thrown in depressions and covered over, or very shallowly dug holes and thrown in and piled up on each other. And we know the casualties of the 71st Highlander is very small also. So those 3 things give us the opportunity to narrow down on that gentleman. We might be able to figure out who he is.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, but people are so invested in this. I don't know, Steve, if you've seen this. It sounds like you have.
Yeah.
People just really want that connection. They
Oh,
want that story.
The first
right?
thing everybody asks.
Yeah, they're totally cheering. Like they want you to get this thing across the finish line and at least identify a few people. So this past year, Wade and I have been all over New Jersey giving this presentation, and it's remarkable. The emotional connection that people have to the project. And maybe, Steve, you've seen that as well. Just people who don't actually even have an ancestral connection. They're just really touched by the story and the efforts of the archaeology team to recover these individuals, and then of the historians to try and tell the story. Both projects have such incredible parallels to the work that we're doing. And so
you getting interest from Germany too?
Yeah, so that is an interesting question. Not necessarily from the government. We did give them, we notified them prior to the press announcement and actually invited them to visit the site just to see for themselves the work that we're doing and meet us in advance of any news announcement going out. They basically said thank you for the heads up, very polite, but they didn't express much interest in anything beyond that. Interestingly, we did hear from several people in the Hesse region of Germany who did reach out and contact us to say they know that they're descended from Hessian soldiers. How can they help? We also heard from the American consulate in that area. I think his email headline was something like "You're a hit." It made the local newspapers. People were really excited in Germany to be talking about the project, and so. That to me has been, I think, as a public historian, I don't do the archaeology, but I can certainly get the word out about, the project. Just listening to people and seeing the excitement about when they learn about the project is remarkable.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, we touched on it a little bit, and I'm going to kind of attach it to a question here. But I'd like to know a little bit more about kind of the role of amateur archaeologists and people who want to volunteer, because obviously you've gotten a lot of participation from people that aren't professionals. And I'll attach that to a question from Frank, who says, are there opportunities for students of history to assist in the excavations? And what's the procedure to volunteer?
Well, for Redbank, Frank, you can reach out to me. You can reach me through Rowan University's History Department website or Gloucester County, New Jersey Department of Parks and Recreation. And we have an email distribution list. And so we're done for this summer. But we have applied for funding for next summer to have more public archaeology, and we can let you know of any opportunities that might come up. If you are in the state of New Jersey, you can join the Archaeology Society of New Jersey, and they do advertise opportunities for volunteers to participate in projects just like they do with ours, or look in your local communities to see who is doing archaeology and see if they do want to work with volunteers. We are always happy to work with volunteers. When we went into phase 2 of our project last year, after the discovery of human remains, the public component was stopped, obviously, but we did have a committed crew of about 15 other individuals who we could trust, who were devoted and who put in the hard work of assisting the archaeology team. And so they were a really critical component of the success of the project. And they continued, they're the trench crew. They have t-shirts, they come to our events, they come to the park, and it's a remarkable group of individuals who committed so much sweat equity into this project. And we certainly couldn't have done it. We didn't have a budget to hire 15 archaeologists. They were just tremendously devoted to what we were doing.
Well,
Yeah, they're probably one of the best field crews I think I've ever worked with in terms of their devotion and interest. And many of these people were retirees, so they had the time and the ability to come out and work, and they brought other skill sets with them that had come from their original jobs or the jobs that they had had all their careers. They were a good group of people to work with, and they were not doing the excavation of the human remains. That was being done by the professionals, but they were there to assist the excavation work, and it worked out really, really well.
Yeah, for me, we have a kind of a cadre of detectorists that we use. They're really good. We have high quality data. We can follow behind them and not find anything. And during the and at this point, we don't have a project. We may be doing additional work funded by the Historic Camden Foundation, who now owns the property. And if we do that, we would have a need for people, and they can contact me. During the project, we had amazing cooperation from the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. And of course, the human remains were actually not done by the archaeologists. We exposed the bones, and then we turned over the removal to the Richland County Coroner's Office, Dr. Bill Stevens and Dr. Matty Atwell, who are side-by-side partners here, along with Jim Legg. They saved the project. Literally, we're out there getting these guys out and doing it respectfully. At the time, we did not have a lot of volunteers out there because we were trying to get this done without a lot of publicity. So, because even keeping it under hat, so to speak, to be able to work and not have people gawk at the human remains, we still had a lot of high level visitors who came, and so that was always an issue, trying to keep that under control. So we just didn't have a parade of private citizens coming out to help us. But those two organizations really helped us a lot.
You know, Steve, you guys had a ceremony there in April, and you honored the folks, the folks who were found, the remains that were found, and what I wonder is if you can give us a sense of kind of what that was like, and anything memorable from that for you. And then I'm also wondering, because we're approaching the end of our show, if you guys, Jen and Wade, if you're thinking of doing any kind of similar ceremony, and what you might learn from Camden, or what that might involve for you guys. So, Steve, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, our intent was to have the gentlemen all reburied on April 22nd, 2023. We had an amazing ceremony of 3 days that began with us giving a lecture on the Thursday evening, and then the next day was reenactors. We had the U.S. Army. The Army got involved and would not participate in moving the burials from Richland County Coroner's Office to historic Camden, which is a historic park of the village of historic colonial Camden. But here you see, this picture here is of volunteers in these they're Humvees, military Humvees. It's actually a volunteer of people who put every individual's put in a pine coffin, and it was made by a craftsman using 200-year pine. They forged the nails, so the appropriate nails for the period. This gentleman here is the Highlander. You can see the thistle on him. And they were taken from Richland County Coroner's Office on those Humvees through South Carolina to visit schools, and went through Fort Jackson. Here we are at Fort Jackson. And everybody at Fort Jackson turned out and saluted as we went through. They lied in state that Friday evening, and then the next day in the morning, there was a funeral at Episcopal Church in Camden. Then they were taken out to the battlefield where the governor spoke. We had people from England, Scotland, France, various representatives. They were given lots of speeches and ceremonies. We had a flyover. We had F-16s. We had helicopters. We had them brought here on caissons. Everything I'm talking about, you can see on a website. Just Google Camden burials, and you'll see everything that occurred. The entire ceremonies are on video. You can watch them. Probably got 4 or 5 hours worth of watching. The unfortunate part, this was an amazing thing. It was moving. It was tear-jerking. It was everything. It was once in a lifetime thing. Unfortunately, the Army does not want them on the battlefield. And so we are still in negotiations as to exactly where they will be buried. Once that gets settled, they will be put in the ground. That was our a big intent on April 22nd. Unfortunately,
Didn't happen.
bureaucracies get involved.
So, guys, we have no time and lots of questions here, but one of the questions I did want to feel, we got a couple versions of this. Is what can our viewers do to help you promote what you're doing? Get the word out. Lots of people want to help, and they want to know how to do that.
Well, thank you very much.
Here's your chance, Jen. What do you want to say?
You can send a check to.
Well, no,
It would
this is part of it.
If that's the answer, that's the answer. It's
I'll
okay.
do this from the perspective of not working for the county government in Gloucester County. We could use a brand new visitor center because this is such an amazing study. This is really something that the public would love to see. The new kind of range of interpretation that this is going to help with. I mean, Hessian forces in the United States are never really considered the way you could consider them now. The interpretation of these soldiers and these men would be exciting to be able to do here. And ultimately, if we can, we want to push this. And I don't know if Jen was going to try to talk about this, but we're going to try to push this research back into Germany so that we understand what happened to the communities that these people came from. What happens when the message gets back to your small village that says 8 or 10 men who live in your village are gone and you'll never see them again? They died somewhere in North America. We don't know anything about them. What's the effect of that on that community? How do they respond to that? So we're kind of make it a loop from the battlefield back to where they came from.
I would just add, if you're in the Philadelphia area, come take a short trip over the bridge. Over the bridge in South Jersey means either the Ben Franklin or the Walt Whitman, but it's literally 15 minutes from historic downtown Philadelphia. And it's a beautiful park. You can have a picnic. You can take some tours. Park visitation drives our support from Gloucester County. And so the more people who come and visit us and express their excitement about visiting with us, the bigger we get, the more visibility we get, the bigger the budget we get, which could translate into something like a visitor center. And so that's the best way that you could help support us.
Yeah, the South Carolina Battleground Trust and Historic Camden Foundation are both 501(c)(3) profits. The South Carolina Battleground Trust tries to preserve battlefields all over South Carolina, obviously, and you can certainly make a contribution to them, and it would be very helpful. And that would help go towards our DNA studies and everything else like that. So thanks for that opportunity to mention that.
So I want to thank all you guys for joining us today in the opposite order of the way I first introduced you. Wade Katz, Jen Janofsky, and Stephen Smith. Thank you so much for coming on and
so much,
sharing
guys.
with us
Welcome.
about the work you
Thanks
guys
for
have done. Really amazing. And so we say goodbye. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
And
guys.
Thank you very much.
we'll post that contact information and how people can learn more, and do that as we in the next day or two on Facebook, so that you can kind of follow up on that. And Chris, next week,
Speaking
as
of Hessians,
kind of a follow up to this show.
yeah, it's almost like you planned that.
Yeah, almost like we planned it. We're going to have an encore presentation of our interview with Frederica Baer about her book, Hessians, German Soldiers in the American Revolution. And I might point out that Frederica is the person who told us about the Redbank dig. And she has done all sorts of research. That's an amazing book. It was a
It's
great,
one of the best interviews we did. I think.
yeah, really great interview. So we I don't know where you're going, Chris, but we we welcome you to join us for that and next week. And meantime, please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, shout at us on Twitter, listen to our podcast, back us on Patreon. So important. And browse historyhappyhour.com.
Thanks, everybody. Be safe.